Have you ever wondered why some of the most powerful leaders in history seem to break all the rules we learned as children? Why they lie, cheat, and manipulate their way to the top, while we were taught to always tell the truth and be nice to everyone? Well, today we're diving into the mind of the man who literally wrote the book on this controversial approach to power, a man whose very name became a word that means cunning and ruthless. Before we begin this fascinating journey into one of history's most misunderstood minds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the minds that shaped our world. Now, let me tell you about Niccolò Machiavelli, a man who 500 years ago wrote a little book that would forever change how we think about power, politics, and human nature itself. Picture this scene, if you will. It's the year 1513 in Florence, Italy, and a middle-aged man sits alone in a small farmhouse, exiled from the city he loves. He's lost everything, including his job, his status, and his freedom to walk the streets of Florence. This man is Niccolò Machiavelli, and he's about to write something so shocking, so revolutionary that people would still be arguing about it 5 centuries later. But here's the twist that most people don't know. Machiavelli wasn't some evil mastermind plotting world domination from his dark castle. He was actually a devoted public servant who spent 14 years working tirelessly for the Republic of Florence, trying to protect his beloved city from powerful enemies on all sides. Born in 1469 into a family that wasn't rich but wasn't poor either, young Niccolò grew up during one of the most chaotic periods in Italian history. Imagine living in a time when your city could be invaded any day, when powerful families fought bloody battles in the streets, and when today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy without warning. This was the world that shaped Machiavelli's mind. As a child, he watched the famous Medici family get kicked out of Florence, saw a radical priest named Savonarola take over the city and burn books and art in huge bonfires, and then witnessed that same priest get burned alive in the city square when people turned against him. These experiences taught young Niccolò a harsh lesson that would define his entire philosophy. The world isn't fair, people aren't always good, and sometimes survival requires doing things that would make your grandmother very disappointed. When Machiavelli was 29 years old, he got his dream job as a diplomat and secretary for the Florentine Republic. For the next 14 years, he traveled all over Italy and beyond, meeting kings, popes, and warlords. He observed how these powerful people actually behaved behind closed doors, not how they pretended to be in public. He met Cesare Borgia, a ruthless military commander who conquered cities through deception and violence, but also brought order and prosperity to the lands he ruled. He watched Pope Julius II, who was supposed to be a holy man of peace, personally lead armies into battle wearing armor. These experiences opened Machiavelli's eyes to a shocking truth that contradicted everything society claimed to believe. The leaders who succeeded weren't the most moral or virtuous ones. They were the ones who understood that politics is like a dangerous game where being too good could actually get you and your people killed. Then disaster struck. In 1512, the Medici family returned to power in Florence with the help of Spanish troops. Machiavelli, who had served the republic that had kicked the Medicis out, was immediately fired, arrested, and even tortured because they suspected him of plotting against them. Though he was eventually released, he was banned from Florence and forced to live in exile on his small farm. Imagine going from being an important government official meeting with kings and popes to suddenly becoming nobody, stuck in the countryside with nothing but your thoughts and memories. Most people would become bitter and angry, and Machiavelli certainly felt those emotions. But he did something extraordinary with his frustration. He decided to write down everything he had learned about power and politics, creating a handbook that he hoped would get him back into the good graces of the Medici family. This handbook was called The Prince, and it contained advice so shocking that for centuries people would debate whether Machiavelli was serious or secretly making fun of tyrants. He wrote things like, "It's better for a leader to be feared than loved if you can't be both," that a prince must learn how to not be good when necessary, and that the ends justify the means when it comes to maintaining power and protecting your state. To understand why Machiavelli wrote these seemingly evil things, we need to get inside his head and understand his psychology. First, Machiavelli was what we would today call a realist. He didn't care about how the world should be in some perfect fantasy. He cared about how the world actually was, with all its ugliness and danger. In his mind, a leader who tried to be perfectly good and honest in a world full of liars and criminals would quickly be destroyed, and their people would suffer as a result. Second, Machiavelli was deeply traumatized by the chaos and violence he had witnessed throughout his life. He had seen cities burned, families destroyed, and innocent people slaughtered because their leaders were too weak or too naive to protect them. This trauma made him believe that maintaining order and stability was more important than following traditional moral rules. Think of it like this. If you were a parent and someone threatened to hurt your children, you might do things to protect them that you would normally consider wrong. Machiavelli saw political leaders as parents of entire cities or nations responsible for protecting thousands or millions of people. In his mind, a leader who let their people suffer because they were too squeamish to do dirty work was actually more immoral than one who did terrible things to keep their people safe. But here's where Machiavelli's psychology gets really interesting. Despite writing all these harsh and cynical things in The Prince, his other writings reveal a man who actually loved republican government and freedom. In his book, Discourses on Livy, he praises citizen participation and argues that free republics are actually stronger and better than kingdoms ruled by princes. This contradiction has puzzled scholars for centuries. Was Machiavelli a champion of democracy or a teacher of tyrants? The answer might be both. Some historians believe Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a warning, exposing the dirty tricks of tyrants so people could recognize and resist them. Others think he was simply being practical, offering different advice for different situations, like a doctor prescribing different medicines for different diseases. Machiavelli's influence on history has been absolutely enormous, though not always in ways he might have expected or wanted. Kings and queens throughout Europe studied the prince carefully, learning his lessons about maintaining power. Leaders like Catherine de' Medici in France, Henry VIII in England, and Frederick the Great in Prussia all reportedly kept copies of his book close at hand. But his influence went far beyond just teaching rulers how to rule. Machiavelli fundamentally changed how we think about politics itself. Before him, most political writing was about ideal societies and perfect rulers who followed religious and moral law perfectly. Machiavelli ripped away this beautiful mask and forced people to confront the ugly reality of how power actually works. He separated politics from religion and morality, arguing that they operated by different rules. This idea was revolutionary and dangerous, which is why the Catholic Church banned his books for centuries. Machiavelli's ideas pop up everywhere, from business schools teaching executives about strategic thinking to military academies training future generals. Politicians still use Machiavellian tactics, though they usually won't admit it publicly. When a leader makes a calculated decision to break a promise for strategic advantage or uses fear to maintain control, They're following Machiavelli's playbook, whether they know it or not. But perhaps Machiavelli's greatest impact has been on our language and culture itself. When we call someone Machiavellian, we mean they're cunning, manipulative, and willing to do anything for power. His name has become synonymous with political evil, which is deeply ironic, considering he saw himself as a patriot trying to help his country. The truth about Machiavelli is more complex and more human than his reputation suggests. He was a man caught between idealism and realism, between what he wished the world could be and what he knew it actually was. His writings force us to confront uncomfortable questions that remain relevant today. Is it better for a leader to be honest and risk failure, or to lie and succeed? Can good ends justify evil means? Is it possible to have power without corruption? These questions don't have easy answers, which is why we're still debating them 500 years after Machiavelli first asked them. Whether you see him as a villain who corrupted politics or a hero who told difficult truths, there's no denying that Niccolò Machiavelli forever changed how we understand power, leadership, and human nature itself. His legacy reminds us that the world of politics is complex, often dark, and that sometimes the most important truths are the ones we least want to hear. But what made Machiavelli think this way? To truly understand his psychology, we need to dig deeper into his mind and the experiences that shaped him. You see, Machiavelli wasn't born cynical or calculating. He started out as an idealist, someone who believed in the goodness of people and the possibility of creating a perfect society. But life has a way of teaching harsh lessons, and for Machiavelli, those lessons came fast and hard. When he was young, he watched his beloved Florence torn apart by competing families, foreign armies, and religious fanatics. He saw good people destroyed by bad ones, honest leaders overthrown by liars, and noble causes crushed by selfish interests. These experiences didn't just change his opinions. They fundamentally rewired how his brain processed the world around him. Think about it like this. Imagine you're playing a game where everyone else is cheating. At first, you might try to play fair, hoping others will follow your example. But after losing again and again, watching cheaters win while honest players suffer, wouldn't you start to wonder if maybe the rules themselves are wrong? That's exactly what happened to Machiavelli. His psychology shifted from idealism to what we might call strategic realism. He didn't become evil or heartless. He simply adapted to the reality he observed. This adaptation is actually a normal psychological response to repeated trauma and disappointment. When our expectations are constantly violated, our brains literally change how they predict future events. Machiavelli's mind became wired to expect the worst from people, not because he hated humanity, but because experience had taught him that preparing for the worst was the only way to survive. What's fascinating is how Machiavelli channeled this psychological transformation into his writing. Instead of becoming bitter or giving up, he decided to share his hard-won wisdom with future generations. This shows another aspect of his psychology. Despite everything, he still cared about making the world better. He just believed that the path to improvement required accepting ugly truths first. His famous book, The Prince, reads like a survival manual for leaders in a dangerous world. Every piece of advice comes from a place of genuine concern, even when that advice sounds harsh. When he says a leader should be feared rather than loved, he's not being cruel. He's trying to prevent the chaos he witnessed when weak leaders lost control. The psychological concept of cognitive dissonance helps explain Machiavelli's seemingly contradictory nature. On one hand, he genuinely loved Republican values like freedom and citizen participation. On the other hand, He advocated for strong, sometimes tyrannical leadership. How could the same person believe both things? The answer lies in his ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously. He understood that what works in theory doesn't always work in practice. This kind of complex thinking is actually a sign of high intelligence and psychological maturity. Children see the world in black and white, but adults understand that most things exist in shades of gray. Machiavelli's psychology was that of someone who had moved beyond simple moral categories to embrace paradox and complexity. His influence on history extends far beyond politics. Machiavelli fundamentally changed how we understand human psychology itself. Before him, most thinkers assumed people were naturally good or naturally evil. Machiavelli introduced a more nuanced view. People are naturally self-interested, and their behavior depends on circumstances. This insight predated modern psychology by 400 years, yet it aligns perfectly with what we now know about human behavior. Studies show that the same person can be heroic in one situation and cowardly in another, generous when secure and selfish when threatened. Machiavelli understood this instinctively, which is why his advice focuses on creating systems and incentives rather than relying on individual virtue. The way Machiavelli thought about power reveals deep psychological insights that modern leaders still use today. He understood that power isn't just about force or authority, it's about perception and psychology. A leader who appears weak invites challenge, even if they're actually strong. A leader who appears strong deters enemies, even if they're actually vulnerable. This focus on appearance might seem dishonest, but Machiavelli saw it as practical psychology. He knew that humans make decisions based on incomplete information and emotional reactions. By managing how others perceive you, you're not lying. You're simply using psychology strategically. Modern fields like behavioral economics and social psychology have confirmed many of Machiavelli's observations about how humans actually make decisions versus how we think we make them. What's particularly interesting about Machiavelli's psychology is his relationship with morality. He wasn't immoral or amoral. He had a different kind of morality based on outcomes rather than intentions. This consequentialist thinking says that the results of your actions matter more than your motivations. If lying prevents a war that would kill thousands, then lying becomes the moral choice. If being cruel to a few prevents suffering for many, then cruelty becomes kindness. This way of thinking requires incredible psychological flexibility and the ability to override our natural emotional responses. Most people feel guilty when they lie or hurt others, even for good reasons. Machiavelli trained himself to think beyond these immediate emotional reactions, to consider long-term consequences. This doesn't mean he didn't feel these emotions. He simply learned to process them differently, prioritizing strategic thinking over emotional impulses. His impact on history is impossible to overstate. Every modern democracy, dictatorship, and everything in between has been influenced by Machiavellian thinking. When democratic leaders make tough decisions that compromise their stated values, they're following Machiavelli's advice about the gap between ideals and reality. When corporations study consumer psychology to influence buying decisions, they're applying Machiavellian insights about human nature. Even in our personal relationships, we unconsciously use Machiavellian strategies, presenting ourselves differently to different people, managing our reputation, and sometimes choosing strategic dishonesty over potentially harmful truth. This isn't necessarily bad. It's simply human nature, as Machiavelli understood it. His greatest contribution wasn't teaching people to be manipulative, but helping us understand the manipulation that already exists in human interaction. What's truly fascinating is that Machiavelli predicted how his ideas would spread through society like ripples in a pond. He understood that once people became aware of these psychological tactics, they would start seeing them everywhere, creating what we might call a Machiavellian awakening in society. Today, we live in that awakened world he imagined, where everyone from politicians to social media influencers consciously applies these principles. Think about how modern leaders carefully craft their public image, showing strength when needed and vulnerability when it serves their purpose. This is pure Machiavelli, the art of controlled perception that he pioneered 500 years ago. His psychological insights have become so embedded in our culture that we often don't realize we're thinking like him. When parents tell their children that sometimes being too nice can make others take advantage of them, they're teaching a Machiavellian lesson about human nature. When business schools teach negotiation tactics that involve strategic disclosure of information, they're applying his principles about the power of controlling what others know. The psychology behind his thinking reveals someone who understood that humans are neither purely good nor purely evil, but complex beings driven by self-interest, fear, love, and ambition all at once. He saw that most people want to believe in simple moral stories, where good always wins and bad always loses, but reality is much messier. This understanding made him write things that shocked people then and still shock people now, because he was willing to say what others only thought privately. His influence extends far beyond politics into every area where humans interact and compete. In sports, coaches study opponents' psychological weaknesses, using Machiavellian tactics to gain mental advantages. In dating and relationships, people present idealized versions of themselves early on, gradually revealing their true nature once emotional investment has been established. This isn't necessarily deceptive. It's strategic self-presentation that Machiavelli would recognize immediately. The corporate world has perhaps embraced his teachings most fully, with entire industries built around understanding and influencing human psychology. Marketing professionals study consumer fears and desires, creating campaigns that tap into deep psychological needs. Human resources departments use Machiavellian insights to manage workplace dynamics, understanding that a mix of rewards and consequences, hope and fear, creates the most productive environment. Even modern technology companies apply his principles, designing apps and platforms that exploit psychological vulnerabilities to keep users engaged. What would Machiavelli think of social media? He would probably be amazed at how perfectly it embodies his ideas about reputation management and the power of perception. Every post, every photo, every comment is a small Machiavellian act of crafting public image. The way influencers build parasocial relationships with followers they'll never meet mirrors his advice about making people feel connected to leaders while maintaining strategic distance. His purpose wasn't to create a world of manipulators, but to help people navigate a world that already contained them. He wanted readers to understand the game being played around them, whether they chose to play it themselves or simply defend against it. This defensive aspect of Machiavellian thinking is often overlooked. By understanding how manipulation works, we become less susceptible to it. When we recognize flattery as a potential tactic, we can appreciate genuine compliments while remaining wary of those with ulterior motives. His impact on history goes beyond creating cunning leaders. He democratized strategic thinking. Before Machiavelli, such knowledge was passed secretly among ruling elites. By writing it down in common language, he gave ordinary people access to the psychological tools of power. This revolutionary act changed the balance of society forever. Suddenly, merchants could think like princes, and common citizens could understand the motivations behind their leaders' actions. The psychological profile of Machiavelli himself reveals someone who experienced deep disappointment in human nature, but refused to become cynical. Instead, he became realistic, accepting humans as they are rather than lamenting what they should be. This acceptance allowed him to love humanity despite its flaws, much like a parent loves a child while recognizing their imperfections. His writings show genuine affection for Italy and its people, even as he cataloged their weaknesses and failures. Modern psychology has validated many of his observations about human behavior. Studies on cognitive bias confirm his insights about how people rationalize selfish actions. Research on group dynamics supports his ideas about how fear and reward motivate collective behavior. Behavioral economists have proven his claims about short-term thinking and the power of immediate incentives over long-term benefits. In many ways, Machiavelli was doing empirical psychology centuries before it became a formal science. As we reach the end of our journey through Machiavelli's mind, it's important to remember that understanding his psychology doesn't mean embracing every aspect of it. We can appreciate his insights while maintaining our own moral compass. We can use his understanding of human nature to build better relationships, create more effective organizations, and protect ourselves from manipulation. The choice of how to apply this knowledge remains ours, just as Machiavelli intended. His legacy lives on not in creating evil, but in revealing truth, however uncomfortable that truth might be. So, what can we take away from understanding Machiavelli's psychology? First, that human nature hasn't changed much in 5 centuries. Second, that being aware of psychological tactics helps us both use and defend against them. Third, that sometimes the most caring thing we can do is be realistic about human limitations rather than holding impossible standards. And finally, that knowledge itself is neither good nor evil. It's how we choose to use it that matters. If this exploration of Machiavelli's fascinating psychology has opened your eyes to new ways of understanding human behavior, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's most intriguing minds. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new, and comment below with your thoughts on whether Machiavelli was ultimately helpful or harmful to humanity. Until next time, remember that understanding human psychology is the first step to both protecting yourself and positively influencing the world around you.